one thing I've never really understood is why Christian Americans, and I'll give you a small anecdote. I was once sitting in a hotel lobby when I was in Washington, and I was talking to the people next to me, and they were a pastor who was a Christian Zionist speaking at this Christian Zionist conference, and I was just very confused as to how that's occurred, firstly, and why Christians seem to have such a strong sentiment to support the Jews in Israel, when in some sense, of course, they don't seem to be extremely favorable towards the Christians in many ways. But also, I guess I just don't see why they would be concerned of what is essentially a different religion. Now, of course, someone could say Christianity developed upon Judaism and so forth, but there still seems to be an over support for Israel, when I don't think, number one, scripturally, it's the evidence behind that is very strong, and number two, it seems to be there's so much more other things that Christians should be concerned about, especially in America, than this case of what's going on in the Middle East in relationship to the Jews. So I was wondering whether you could give me a perspective of why Christian Zionism is such a strong movement, and well, how are we meant to kind of get our heads around it and understand it, apart from potentially its political implications, which already exist.
Look, I don't have a good understanding of dispensationalism and the changes that dispensationalism brought to the Protestant mindset. I mean, Martin Luther was quite hostile to Jews.
Yes, you don't say.
Yeah, exactly. Extremely hostile to them. And you end up with these Protestant Americans who have forgotten all of that and who have transformed Israel into an exception. And in the American mind, and you see that with strange people like Douglas Murray, British, of course, but a neocon, you see this weird melding of completely separate ideas. Ancient Israel and the modern state of Israel and the modern Israeli army. And these are two completely separate things. Now, from the Catholic perspective, ancient Israel is now the church. And what was addressed to ancient Israel in scripture is in fact addressed to the church today. For a lot of Protestants, no, the Jews still have a role to play in the end times, and they must be gathered in Israel for the rapture to happen, which is a bit strange, because it's like saying, I want all the Jews to go to Israel so that the meteor of the rapture will hit them. And that's me loving them. I think any of us who's honest with himself shouldn't be very keen about the end times, because we all know our own sinfulness. And we all know that if we're really put up for judgment today, would we actually do well? Because I think Protestants tend to believe that they're saved by faith alone, it gives them an overconfidence when it comes to expectations from the end times, which we as Catholics don't have and certainly should not have. So I think that kind of ties into it. And then I think a lot of it is just propaganda. I mean, if you listen to American media, you know, their regard for the Palestinians, the way that they craft their headlines, the way that they talk about them, isn't very appealing. And I also think that a part of it is the Palestinians themselves. I mean, when Hamas was saying, no, we didn't rape anybody on 7 October, they also said, however, there were other people who just came out of Gaza with us, and they were the ones who probably did the raping. That's a horrendous thing, to say that random Gazans just poured over into Israel and just started doing things. That's not exactly great. If you look at the tactics that the Palestinians use in the 90s and in the 2000s, suicide bombings and the defense of that kind of tactic, well, nobody in a civilized society is going to respect that. You're going to blow yourself up in the middle of a bunch of civilians? Why? Where's the honor in that? So there are all of these elements. Part of it is down to how the Americans think about religion. Part of it is how much propaganda comes out from American media. And part of it is the reality that the Palestinians don't do a great job of making themselves appealing.
Mm.
If you look at the way that some of the protests and so on, we're going to shut down a university. Why are you going to shut down a university? We're going to slow walk people to the airport and make sure they can't get to their flights on time. Why?
Mm.
How does that serve your purpose? And the melding of the pro-Palestinian groups, the Islamist pro-Palestinian groups, and the leftist pro-Palestinian groups, I think is particularly dangerous to the West in general, because these are two toxic ideologies. And I think people look at this toxic cocktail and think, well, clearly the other side is right. Whatever this is, I don't want that. And American media doesn't do a good job of informing you. I mean, it's not a long conversation where you can discuss the history and understand where people are coming from and why they're in conflict. It's all about cheering my own side, whatever that side happens to be. So I think these are the different strands that blend together and inform the American public's thinking. As to the full-on details of Christian Zionism, Protestants are strange, man. I mean, when I converted, it never occurred to me to be a Protestant because it just looks like chaos with a cacophony of voices coming out of everywhere with 1,000,001 different theories and no way of establishing what bedrock is and what truth is. Whereas the appeal of Catholicism is that there is a rock, and on this rock a church is built, and that church has established a dogma, and it's established a clear creed and faith, and it'll explain them to you and it'll let you reference them. Whereas when you talk to Protestants, and I think when you talk to a lot of Muslims as well, you find that there's this haze, there's this miasma. You have no idea where you stand because there isn't an authority. There's no head you can talk to. There's nobody in charge. And the result becomes chaos. And incidentally, going off on another tangent, this is why the Shia are beating the Sunnis right now. Because the Shia have a unitary leadership. And that accounts for something. Whereas the Sunnis, everybody's a general. Everybody's a theologian. Everybody's an expert. Everybody can explain scripture. Everybody can say whatever he wants. And with the Protestants, it's sort of the same. I'm the authority. Who are you to challenge me? Well, I'm nobody. I just submit to this guy because the church tells me to, and that's that.